Welcome to Khanversations. I'm Muqtedar Khan, your host, and today I'm going to talk to you about the devastating impact of Donald Trump's so called reciprocal tariffs. Obviously, as you are all aware, yesterday Donald Trump announced his reciprocal tariffs to nearly all countries in the world. So I'm going to go through it. It does appear from this that some countries have benefited more than others, especially four countries. Russia has got no tariffs against it, partly because it's already suffering under sanctions, and there's hardly any trade between the West, especially the US and Russia at the moment. So there are no tariffs announced for Russia. There were no tariffs announced for Canada and Mexico, surprisingly, but that is perhaps because there are already negotiations going on, and the 25% tariffs that were posed, well, not exactly 25, it varied across different sectors. For example, there was lesser tariffs on energy and then a bit more on aluminum and steel and stuff like that. A lot on cars, for example, 25%. So those tariffs that were levied on Mexico and Canada do remain in place, but there are intense negotiations going on already with Canada and Mexico. And of course, India, which, according to some commentators, has really come out not that bad compared to other countries. In fact, some people feel that Donald Trump's tariff regime may give India an opportunity to actually benefit from basically other people's suffering. So I will talk about all of those. I will talk about what the tariffs have done to the US economy at the moment, what they might do to the world economy, how are they impacting other parts of the world, and in particular, India. But before that, please subscribe to Khanversations, like this video, press the bell icon, and do not forget to share this video with your socio-political network. So I want to begin by asking a few questions as a result of this. One thing that must be made clear that these are not reciprocal tariffs. The idea of using the word reciprocal tariffs was to remind people that, look, America is not imposing new tariffs on anybody else. America has been suffering for several years as a result of an unfair practice where countries continue to impose tariffs on American exports to their countries. For example, the tariffs apparently that Canada imposes on American cheese is over 300%. And the amount of tariffs India had imposed on American cars was about 70 to 150%. So Donald Trump was trying to make the point that he didn't start this for more than 40, 50 years. Since the era of globalization, the United States has been giving access to its market to everybody else, while those countries continued to keep American products out. The worst abuser of that was China, followed by India and other countries, including some of the countries which are America's best allies, such as Canada, Europe, and Japan. So Trump was trying to send the message that you have been doing this to us for so many decades. Now we are simply trying to balance it out by introducing reciprocal tariffs. But in the end, he sort of chickened out, really. What he did was to impose only 50% of it. So I guess under pressure, I don't know what the pressure is. The pressure is that he might alienate allies, or he might inadvertently force allies and enemies to come together. As you can see, that China, South Korea, and Japan, where South Korea and Japan are America's treaty partners, they are treaty allies of the United States. China is a peer competitor, but they all three came together to respond to Donald Trump's tariffs. So either out of fear that he might just unite the world against the United States, or out of fear that it might have too much of a devastating initial impact on the US market itself, take the inflation through the roof, etc. I don't know what the fear was, but he basically did half of what he was threatening all these weeks, that he would impose reciprocal tariffs. But what he did was to impose only 50% of those reciprocal tariffs, as you can see from the various charts. So, for example, this prominent chart that was displayed According to the Trump's administration, China was imposing 67% tariffs on the US, and so half of that, roughly 34%, he's rounding off the 50%, so 33 and a half, so 34% tariffs have been imposed as reciprocal. But in the case of China, it's very special because the US had already imposed about 20% tariffs. So this is, we're looking at 54 or 59% tariffs, 25 plus 34 or 20 plus 34. I don't remember exactly how much, I think it was 25% that were already imposed on China. So across the board, it's 59% for China. But if you look at European Union, the Trump administration estimates that the European Union, on an average, imposes 40% or 39% tariffs on US goods. And so the US reciprocal tariffs should have been 39, but it's 20%. And similarly for India, the estimate was for 52%, and the US is imposing only 26%. Some people in the United States who do not believe in free trade and who believe in fair trade are quite upset. Especially the famous commentator from CNBC who was on CNN complaining and said that Donald Trump should have imposed reciprocal tariffs. Uh, the idea is not to impose tariffs because tariffs are going to have a huge negative impact not just on the countries on whom the tariffs are imposed, but also on the United States. So if the US is imposing high tariffs, say, on Taiwan, uh, for example, 24% on it's 32% on Taiwan, 24% on Japan. So if this is going to be levied on semiconductors, so all electronic goods, whether they are produced in the US or produced elsewhere, the price is going to go up significantly because the price of semiconductors is going to go up unless the US starts manufacturing all those semiconductors here in the US, which is the purpose of this tariffs, really. So what it's going to do is hurt Taiwan's economy as well as hurt the United States economy. So Trump feels that he's using the tariffs as a leverage to force other countries to bring their tariffs down. So the question that I want to ask is Donald Trump going to destroy globalization or is going to reset globalization? So for example, if countries respond with counter tariffs, so already Taiwan has tariffs on the US, which according to the Trump administration is 64%. And now Trump has imposed 32% tariffs, which means it's going to affect Taiwan's exports to the United States. But if Taiwan were to come back with something else and raises its tariffs from 64 to say 80%, and then Donald Trump responds by taking this 32 to 40%, or even 80%. We don't know what the second iteration is going to be. Is it going to be 50% or truly reciprocal? It's going to hurt both the countries. So if all these countries respond to the United States, then rest assured that there will be no globalized economy anymore left. In fact, the global economy will shrink by nearly 10 to 12 billion dollars. It's like taking out the third and the fourth biggest economies plus Saudi Arabia and Turkey. So if you take the four plus trillion-dollar economy of Germany, four plus trillion-dollar economy of Japan, and take Saudi Arabia and Turkey and take these things out of the world, so you have about $11 trillion right there. So that is how much we expect the global economy to shrink if this tit for tat business on tariffs continues. But if most countries respond like the way India did, which is and Vietnam is promising to do. In fact, Israel also reduced its tariff. Israel was imposing about 17%, I think, tariffs on the United States. Israel was 33% apparently, and it has reduced all its tariffs, but yet the U.S. has imposed 17% on Israel. But anyway, if many of the countries adopt this policy and reduce their tariffs, thereby reducing the semi-reciprocal tariffs that Donald Trump has imposed, then what is going to happen is that you're going to have a global economy where, theoretically speaking, we have truly more globalization than we had so far. So far, the globalized economy was where the US was practicing free trade. charging about 2.5% tariffs on goods across the board to all countries. But most of the other countries were having high tariffs. So we did have a global economy, but with lots of protectionism in it. But if Trump's tariffs really force the world to reduce their tariffs to what is below the current level, and Donald Trump then pulls back his tariffs, that we will have a more globalized global economy than we had in the past. So that is a possibility, but it looks very remote right now. Everybody is threatening to retaliate. What I find very fascinating is that whether it is listening to the new Prime Minister of Canada, Carney, or listening to the European Union leaders, etc., they are all talking as if that they had not been imposing any tariffs on the US at all. I mean, their reaction is as if, oh my God, we allow American goods to come here for free, and now they are going to charge us tariffs. This is so bad, so evil, etc. That to me is quite fascinating. That none of these countries who are complaining about the tariffs acknowledge the fact that they themselves had been charging sometimes prohibitive tariffs. And it's not just that they're charging tariffs, but they're also placing a lot of hurdles, like India, like China in particular, and to some extent even Japan, non-tariff barriers, which make it very difficult for the United States to even enter the market. Limits on investments, limits on processes, delays in processes, etc. So Trump is targeting not just the tariffs, but also the non-tariff barriers to trade. So this is one question: is are Trump's tariffs going to basically re-globalize the world with a more global economy with lesser protectionism and lesser tariffs than in the past, or they're going to completely backfire and we're going to have this tit for tat tariff war going on where the rest of the world is getting increasingly upset with the United States and retaliating against it. We will see what happens, because there's no doubt that the United States economy is very strong at the moment. The unemployment is hit a historical low. The inflation is also just 3%. And the worst case scenario that is predicted is 5% interest, 5% inflation at the US. So the tariffs will raise it by 1.5%, at the most 2%. To 5%. So this will be like 2022. 2021, the US inflation was about 7% at that time. So we will see how much of a damage it is. The reaction from the stock market was horrific today. The United States lost $2.5 trillion of market capitalization. So, for example, the Dow Jones went down by 4%. The S&P index went down by close to 5%, and the Nasdaq, which is essentially the tech sector, went down by even 16%. So that is a huge drop. So you can see that across all indices, the U.S. economy, it's not just the U.S. Markets, the European markets, the German economy, stock market is down. The Japanese stock market is also going down pretty fast. Even the Indian stock market went down by about 0.5%. And the Indian stock market had been going down for the last 6 months. The Sensex or Nifty has at least lost by 17% in the last 6 months, and the other market by about 10-12%. So there has been a gradual decline in stock markets. In the last 2 days, a lot of private investors and institutional investors in India have left India very rapidly. So the stocks are falling in India, but domestic institutions are investing in the stock market. I guess they feel that this is a good time to buy some of the desired stocks which were high up but are now going down a little bit. So my second question is this: that the whole purpose of Donald Trump's attack on globalization is to reindustrialize America. So America has become a huge service sector economy with nearly 80% of GDP is produced by the service sector. Very little manufacturing is going on, and he wants to bring back manufacturing. There is a particular segment of the population in the United States which has suffered significantly as a result of globalization, as a result of jobs going abroad. and now he's thinking of bringing it back. This is most economists recognize that this is the goal, but they feel that uh, it's not possible at the moment to bring back manufacturing to the United States. But something interesting has also happened. So when you raise tariffs, your currency becomes stronger. So all economists, or most economists, most economic institutions like banks and investment firms were predicting that once the tariffs were imposed, the US dollar would become stronger and stronger. And once the US dollar becomes stronger, it becomes more difficult for the US to export. So even if other countries were going to reduce the tariffs, the US would not be able to export as much because of a very strong dollar. But surprisingly, the dollar has been going down. So a few days ago, the dollar, if you checked on the dollar index, was 1.4. It's now 1.1. So while the tariffs are going up, dollar is still going down, which is kind of unconventional. So none of the economists would predict it. It's not happening as you would predict in a textbook. So who knows? Maybe the economists are wrong, and something good might actually come out of this for the United States. But one thing is for sure, the inflation is going to go up. So things are going to become expensive, especially cars, for example. So the question is, will it bring back manufacturing and reindustrialization to the US? There might be some, but not desired. We will see how sustained this campaign is. If the stock market continues to drop and there's panic in the public and there's a lot of anger among public, if it becomes too strong, who knows? It already appears that Donald Trump, like I said, he did not impose reciprocal tariffs. They are 50% of what would have been reciprocal tariffs. So we'll see what has happened. But nonetheless, he has raised the tariffs. He has suffered a huge setback on the stock market, and his allies and his staff members are still going out there and saying that the president is committed to sticking with this tariff regime. Uh, the third question that I want to ask is this going to lead to a global recession? One of the logics about understanding that the dollar is going down while tariffs are going up is perhaps an indication that the economy is going to shrink and the US is going to be very likely or most likely in a recession by the end of this year. Recession essentially means the way we talk about recession is that if you have 2 quarters of negative GDP growth, then you are technically in a recession, which means that the economy, instead of expanding, is shrinking. So is it possible that we will witness a global recession, not just in the US, but in Europe, North America, Canada, Mexico, Japan, all the big economies? Most of the European economies were on the verge of experiencing recession. The best hopes for France and Germany and other countries was 1% growth. And if these tariffs are going to have an impact on those countries, then most probably Europe is going to be in recession by probably second or third quarter of this year. So the question is, will there be a global recession? And the answer is that most likely. Uh, let's talk a little bit about India. India has fared much better than most people expected because the tariffs that have been imposed are half of what it is. It's 26%. Now, some people feel that this is not that bad. It's not going to be worrisome. Plus, India is now committed to reducing taxes. Trump has already said that India is going to drop those taxes. So these taxes don't come into force until the 9th of April. So it's possible that India might reduce its taxes and negotiate and bring down the semi-reciprocal tariff charges. But the signals coming out of the White House is that even if all the countries bring their tariffs down to 0%, uh, the Trump administration is determined to keep the 10% minimum across the board. So it's quite possible that the rest of the world might, even if they reduce their tariffs, they might bring it down to 10%, but not go below that. There are some countries who have said that they are not going to respond to the United States, like countries like Australia, who are quite shocked by what the US has done. But there are others, especially like European Union and Canada, who are definitely going to respond in a very aggressive fashion. We'll see what China does. China has also threatened that it's going to come up with a commensurate response. We will see. It's not necessary that they might respond with tariffs. There are many other ways in which they can respond by using non-tariff barriers, etc. So my last question about the tariffs, I will talk more about India in a bit, is this going to lead to a fragmentation? If countries, like I said, if the countries reduce the tariff, then we might have a more globalized global economy. However, if countries do retaliate against the United States and it brings down the exports of all countries worldwide, because the US is the biggest importer, the US runs a huge deficit, more than $2 trillion every year. So if all of that begins to shrink, then the economies of most countries which depend on exports, particularly to the US, and remember, say for example, take the case of Taiwan. If Taiwan raises its tariffs, it's not going to do it just for the US. It's going to do it for everybody. So all exports to Taiwan are going to be impacted. So Taiwan could experience a recession. Taiwan could experience inflation. So what we are going to see is that it is quite possible that just as Japan, China, and South Korea have come together to respond, and China is trying to get India also to align with itself and cooperate with China. We'll see how India responds to China. But if such uh, groupings emerge, which are responding and coordinating their responses together, then it's quite possible that we might see a kind of regionalizations of economies, China and some of its buddies coming together, where they might practice free trade among themselves while imposing tariffs only on the US. And the same could happen. So it will be like European unions, like loosely formed several European unions in Africa, in the Middle East, in Asia. I don't know, but the possibility that a fragmented global economy might emerge with a few clusters of coordinated responses, all driven by protectionism and tariffs. Now, if you look at India, I want you to look at India's exports. So people don't realize that the US is India's biggest trading partner. The trade is about $130 trillion. So the India exports about $80 billion worth of stuff, 85, 87, I think, in 2024. And India imports a little more than $40 billion worth of goods from the US. And so the trade imbalance is about 46%, $46 billion for 2024. But this is only in merchandise. And if you look at India's total trade for 2024 is about $880 billion, of which about $322 trillion, I think, is services, and about 400 plus is goods and merchandise. So of the services, about 70% of services, which is tourism, financial services, and of course IT, computer services, all of this go to the United States. So this tariff business is not yet impacting the service industry. So India's major export to the US is service. So keep that in mind, that 70% of India's services, IT services, go to the US, and there is going to be no tariffs on that at all. So the US-India trade will remain robust even after the tariff regime happens. But with goods, you can take a look at this. For example, India's top 6 merchandise exports to the US. The blue is 2023, 2022, 2023 fiscal year, and the black one is the last year that we have data for. So first of all, you can see across the board that India's exports to the US in 2024 have shrunk. They have become less than they were in 2023. So its engineering goods have gone from 18.6 to 17.6 billion dollars. The electronics good, which is the second biggest export, followed by gems and jewelries, and pharmaceuticals, which is where it has increased to 8.7, and then textiles and petroleum products. And you can see the U.S. exports of petroleum, which used to be $10 billion, have actually become half of what it was in 2024 because India has tried to maximize imports from Russia. And then you can see the other six products. So the one good news is that the Trump administration has so far not imposed any tariffs on any countries when it comes to pharmaceuticals or semiconductors, because I guess the fear of hurting America's own manufacturing, because semiconductors, every manufacturing sector now needs semiconductors. So that way, in that sense, those tariffs that you see that are being imposed on Taiwan may not be impacting the semiconductor industry. So on these two items, pharmaceuticals and semiconductors, uh, the Trump administration has not announced any tariff. Some people feel that it is their effort to send the message that, look, we are very compassionate, we understand the importance of health, we do not want to raise the price of medicines. But it is also possible that they're holding it back for a second round. So if countries retaliate against the US by raising the tariffs, then Trump will then impose tariffs on pharmaceuticals and all other products. Whatever it is, at the moment, it appears that India's pharmaceutical industry is not going to be impacted. So India's trade, which probably is going to become about $10 billion in 2025 in pharmaceuticals, may not be impacted. That's why in the stock market, while overall the stock market went down in India, the pharma stocks went up by 4 to 5% today. Uh, there is one more thing that is important to understand is that the US has imposed more than 50% or 57% or 59% tariffs on China, which means that a lot of things that China was exporting to the US are going to be very expensive. And so the demand for Chinese manufactured products will decrease because of the price. So the argument is that this gives India an opportunity to then export stuff because the tariff rate on India is just 26%, whereas the tariff rate for China will be 59%, more than double. So India will have an edge uh, over China. And so the assumption is that this is a great opportunity for India to take away some of the market, U.S. market, away from China, away from Vietnam, which is expecting a tariff rate of, I think, 46%. Yes, so there are those countries whose tariff rates are much higher. But in order to do that, India will have to produce products which are in quality comparable to China's, and also at least at the price or a little more than what China is making, to take advantage of this tariff differential and get an edge in exports. So there is an opportunity for India to take away some of the Chinese market. But we will see how this really pans out. So far, the country that has shown the least effort to negotiate. I was listening to a former Treasury Secretary under Bush administration who was in China last week, and he came back and he said he was very surprised that the Chinese were very confused and they did not fully understand what Trump was doing, and all they were doing was that they were reading newspapers like you and me. And so he was trying to make the point that he was surprised that there was no back channeling going on between the US and China. So while there is a formal dialogue that India has had when Narendra Modi came here, the Prime Minister of India, and Dr. Jaishankar, and then later Piyush Goyal also came here. So the India is, and then the Assistant Secretary for Treasury of the US went to India. So there is an ongoing continuous dialogue between India and US to come up with a bilateral trade agreement. And if that happens, then this tariff problem goes away. But there is apparently no back channel or any direct negotiations between China and the US, which even I am quite surprised. So it is possible now that instead of retaliating, China might decide to negotiate. We'll see what happens. Neither the US is making any efforts to negotiate with China, nor is China making any efforts. China is the principal challenge that the US faces. So apparently, the US is not interested in negotiations with China. And the US is also not negotiating with the European Union. It has imposed 20% tariffs on its partners, and they are going to retaliate. In fact, the French President Macron was saying that not only will Europe be imposing tariffs on the US goods, but Europe will also be discouraging investments in the US. In the last 2 years, the US had become the biggest attraction for foreign direct investments. In fact, the US, I think last year got over $350 billion of foreign direct investments. And I'm very curious to see what happens in the second quarter after the tariffs have been imposed. So in June, July, we will get to see if this whole tariff business has also discouraged FDIs to come into the US. People who are pulling money out of India, pulling money out of China, they were bringing it back and investing in the United States, and that had been going on for the last 2 years. So we'll see what happens. Are the Europeans able to get their act together? There are people like Professor John Mearsheimer who feel that the Europeans, it is not accurate to think of Europe as one unit. It's composed of 27 countries. And they act very differently. For example, today Hungary decided that it's going to withdraw from the ICC just so that Netanyahu can visit Hungary. What an idiotic thing to do. For one person, they are undermining an international institution, but it is their wish. But the rest of the European Union is not doing that. They are going to respect the ICC. So what is going to happen is that not all European countries are going to be on the same page. And they will basically go after each other. That is what Dr. Mearsheimer is trying to say. The only reason why Europe was able to act often or sometimes as a unit is because of the United States basically imposing itself on it and imposing a unity among Europe, either through NATO or otherwise. But now if the US is going to disentangle itself from European affairs, then what is going to happen really is that European countries will break away. Some will negotiate with the US, some will get into some kind of a competition. We will see what really happens. So far, we have only heard threats from all of these countries, except China, which has taken countermeasures against the US. We haven't seen, and of course, if we have seen some measures from Canada also. But other than that, not many countries have responded right away. In a day or two, we will know. But right now, what is happening is that a lot of money is disappearing from the stock market. We have lost $2.5 trillion. I'm afraid to look at my at my 401k or my retirement account. I can tell you this much, that I looked at the stock market 3 or 4 times, and every time I looked at it, it was falling. It fell by 1,700 points, the Dow Jones Index. And I was looking at it and I said, oh my God, the first time I looked at it, I said, I will have to work 2 years more before retirement. And by the end of the day, it felt as if, okay, now I probably cannot afford to retire. I'm going to work till I die. So yes, there is a huge cost that the whole world is currently experiencing. A lot of people are losing a lot of money that they had invested into the stocks all over the world. So yes, Donald Trump has shaken the world, has promised, even though it is half of what he had promised, but it is quite devastating as it is. There is a lot of fear that it is going to split the Republican Party, because some people are very shocked. Some states, which like the farming states, which are more or less Republican states in the country are going to suffer more than others. If the inflation goes to 5%, then the Republican Party might get completely wiped out in November 2026. So there's a lot of fear among members of Congress and the senators who will be up for election in 2026. Uh, while America elects the entire House in 2026, only one third of the Senate is up for grabs every 2 years. So it is quite possible that if the US economy goes into a recession, or inflation continues to rise, then Donald Trump's party might suffer heavy losses in the midterm elections. So anyway, at the moment, it looks as if one of the few countries which is sitting pretty is India. It has an opportunity to take an advantage, not only because it has good relations with the US, but also the targeting of China, and China's unwillingness or inability to negotiate with Donald Trump might also give India an opportunity to basically go deep into the US market. So I hope you found this analysis a bit more interesting and thought provoking, and maybe some of you have understood exactly what's going on. Um, I just want to tell you that I'm back in the United States. As you can see, I'm in my study after a 10-day trip of Spain. I'm still jet lagged, but happy to be back home. So thank you for watching Khanversations. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like this video, press the bell icon, and don't forget to share this video with the rest of your socio-political network. Until next time, I'm your host, Muqtedar Khan. Take care.